The courthouse didn't look like a place where dreams begin. It looked like paperwork. Quiet benches, scuffed marble floors, and the sharp smell of copier toner drifting through the hall. But this was the setting my sister had chosen for her wedding. A civil ceremony. Efficient, polished. Public enough to post pictures, but private enough to curate who mattered. And I was not on the list. I sat 2 rows back from the signing table, near a fake ficus tree with a dusty base. The morning light pooled across the floor like it had somewhere better to be. I watched the guests arrive mostly from her fiancé's side. They were well-dressed, well-mannered, and quick to ignore me. If you've ever watched your own family treat you like a placeholder in someone else's story, subscribe to Revenge with Seren. Some of us were never lost. We were just waiting for the right room to walk into. Danielle didn't even look at me when I entered. She was busy adjusting her sleeves and smoothing down the front of her white silk dress. It was the kind of outfit that whispered elegance, but with a price tag loud enough to prove something. Her fiancé's mother reached for her hand. The photographer clicked away like they were capturing royalty. I could hear her laugh from where I sat, crisp, deliberate, and designed for attention. When the groom's brother asked, "Is that your sister?" Danielle smiled like she was about to unveil a punchline. She studied law for a while, she said, but she never really practiced. I'm not sure what she's doing now, something flexible, I think. She waved one hand as if she were describing a distant acquaintance. She's still figuring it out. I didn't flinch, but I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Flexible. It was the same word she'd used last Christmas when someone asked if I was still working in legal policy. She likes to keep things open, she'd said, sipping champagne someone else had poured. In Danielle's world, not having a visible title meant you had nothing at all. She never asked about the consulting contracts, or the policy reviews I'd ghostwritten, or the judges who still called me when they were stuck in professional gray areas. She didn't want to know, because knowing would mean admitting I had built something real, something respected, something hers would never reach. Her words sat in the air like steam on glass, thin, clinging, and slightly fogged by performance. One of her fiancé's uncles patted her shoulder. That's all right. It takes some people longer to figure things out. Danielle beamed like the moment had gone exactly as planned. I didn't respond. I just sat with my hands folded in my lap palms, cooling down. I was used to this version of her, the one who smiled sweetly while removing my name from the narrative. I didn't need to correct her, because the truth doesn't need permission to arrive. The bailiff entered and spoke quietly with the officiant, who nodded toward the judge's entrance. A ripple moved through the guests. Danielle straightened. The groom stood. The photographer changed lenses. Everything was about to begin. Except it already had. This wasn't just a courthouse wedding. This was Danielle's audition for a new life. Marrying into a family of attorneys. Positioning herself next to people who had letters behind their names. She thought this ceremony was her elevation. And maybe it was. But it was also my intersection. A woman in a gray pantsuit slipped into the hallway. She didn't stop to chat. She simply checked the docket, made a note, and glanced up. Her eyes landed on me, and she nodded. Subtle, respectful. A flicker of recognition most people would miss. Danielle didn't. "Who's that?" her fiancé asked. "The judge," she replied, lowering her voice. "No, she's just staff," his mother said, waving a hand. "The judge will come through there." But the woman wasn't just staff. Her name was Tessa Mendez. She once clerked under Judge Ramsey, and I had mentored her during her first ethics review for the state commission. That small nod wasn't politeness, it was acknowledgement. Danielle turned her back to me again, whispering something to her future in-laws. They smiled. I sat still. The hallway filled with a soft hush as the judge's assistant opened the courtroom doors. Everyone leaned forward slightly. And then she appeared. Judge Evelyn Ramsey. Her presence was the kind that didn't need volume. Mid-50s, silver-streaked hair posture carved from experience. She walked like someone who didn't hurry, but also didn't wait. The photographer paused mid-frame. The officiant cleared his throat. Danielle smiled wide and stepped forward. But the judge didn't look at her. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. And then quietly, intentionally, she nodded. Not a nod of casual greeting, a nod of respect. Danielle blinked. The room didn't react right away. The moment was too quiet to register with everyone else. But I saw it. So did the photographer. And so did her fiancé, who turned slightly to follow the judge's line of sight. Danielle's smile twitched. She didn't know why, but something had shifted, and I didn't have to say a word. Has someone ever tried to erase your worth only to be silenced by the truth walking in? Tell me in the comments. Because some stories unfold without raising a voice. The judge's nod lingered longer than anyone realized. It was quiet, precise, but undeniable. Danielle's face froze in that halfway smile people wear when they think they're being acknowledged, only to realize the attention belongs somewhere else. She recovered quickly, but not well. Straightened her posture. Reached for the groom's hand with slightly more force than necessary. She turned toward the small crowd and raised her voice like someone lighting a candle against the dark. I just want to thank everyone for being here today, she said. Even at a simple civil ceremony like this one, having family with us means the world. She smiled at the groom's mother, then at his aunt, and finally at his father. Each one met with warm, approving eyes. Mine, of course, were skipped. This has been a whirlwind, she continued. I'm marrying into a family of legal professionals, so of course I've been brushing up. A polite laugh from somewhere in the second row. My sister used to help me with legal definitions when I was in school, she added. She was going to be the lawyer in the family. She turned her head toward me just enough to signal something performative was coming. But she took a different path, she said brightly, a bit less structured. Still figuring things out right, Mallory. The room turned. The moment was warm, not because it was kind, but because it was public. That kind of warmth stings. It crawls down your spine and wraps itself around your knees, forcing you still. I tilted my head, just slightly acknowledging the comment without offering a smile. She's between roles, Danielle added, glancing at her future in-laws for validation. Consulting, I think. She likes to keep things flexible. There it was again. That word. Flexible. She'd used it last Christmas, too, when I declined to explain a project I was bound to confidentiality over. She keeps her options open, she'd told our cousin like I was an unpaid intern at my own life. Now it hung in the air again, except here in this courtroom, it wasn't just family listening. It was judges. Lawyers. People who shaped law, not just married into it. The groom's mother offered a sympathetic smile. Well, sweetheart, it's a hard market right now. You'll find your thing eventually. Sweetheart, that one didn't cut it withered. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just let my silence fill the space Danielle tried so hard to decorate with suggestion. They wanted to believe her version because it was simple, digestible. She had framed me as unfinished, and in a room full of people obsessed with credentials that framing fit like a glove. But Judge Ramsey didn't move. She sat still behind the officiant's table, her hands folded loosely in front of her. Observing, listening. Her pen resting across the top of the ceremony folder like it was holding more weight than ink should. I recognized that stillness. It was the same stillness I'd seen from her once years ago during a closed-door ethics review. When she knew the truth of a situation, but also knew how long it took people to reveal themselves. Danielle glanced at her and misread the silence as compliance. She kept going. "We're just so grateful to have Judge Ramsey here," she gushed. "We really wanted something intimate but official. And she was generous enough to make time." Her tone lifted at the word intimate, as if excluding half the family, namely me, was a sign of taste, not estrangement. The bailiff passed a note to the officiant. The assistant unsealed the folder. The groom stood straighter. Danielle gave his hand a theatrical squeeze. "We're ready when you are, Your Honor," she said. The judge finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, but never soft. "This ceremony is a legal proceeding," she said. "You may celebrate as you wish, but understand what happens in this room holds weight." Danielle nodded, missing the weight in that sentence entirely. But someone didn't. The groom's uncle, seated just behind his mother, leaned forward and whispered, "She's the one from the Judicial Oversight Committee, isn't she?" The groom tilted his head. "I think so." Danielle's spine tightened. She didn't turn her head, but I saw the breath she held between her teeth. The officiant began the legal declaration. It was brief. There were no vows, no poems, just the cold readout of a civic agreement made romantic only by the assumption of love. I sat still. The paper shuffled the lowered voices, the tension building behind Danielle's jaw. I took it all in. And then the moment broke. Judge Ramsey held her pen above the groom's full name. She paused, not long, just enough to make the silence feel earned. Then she looked up. "I'd like to say something," she said calmly. Danielle's eyes widened. "Before I complete this, I want to acknowledge the presence of someone here who understands deeply what this courthouse stands for." Danielle's smile returned like a reflex. She took a small step forward. The judge didn't look at her. "Some people walk into rooms hoping to gain recognition," she continued. "Others have spent years shaping the very foundation those rooms stand on." She looked directly at me. A few heads turned. Danielle's fiancé frowned slightly, and the judge added, "Miss Carter, your work continues to leave an impression. It's good to see you again." She stamped the final page, then without another word handed the folder to her assistant. The room shifted. Danielle blinked and didn't recover. For the first time, she saw me not as a forgotten footnote, but as someone who'd already written the pages she was trying to enter. And I didn't have to say a word. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Not when the judge said my name. Not when Danielle's fiancé looked at me with new eyes. I kept my posture, exactly the same, hands clasped in my lap, one leg crossed gently over the other. Like nothing had changed. But something had. The room didn't move the same after that. Danielle tried to recover. She adjusted her dress straps, gave a nervous smile, and said, "Oh, have you two met before too late?" Too loud. The question clanged in the air. Judge Ramsey simply replied, briefly, and that was all she gave her. It wasn't rude, but it wasn't an invitation either. The kind of tone that says, "You don't need to know more, and you're not owed it." From the back of the room, a younger court officer leaned over to his colleague. I heard the whisper clearly, though he thought he was quiet. "Is that really her Carter, the one from the commission hearings?" The other one glanced toward me and gave a tight nod. "Yeah, that's her." Danielle didn't hear that, but I did, and I let it sit there. The next 15 minutes were a blur of signatures and rushed explanations. The officiant tried to pick up the energy. Danielle giggled at her own nervousness. The photographer snapped fast, almost mechanically now, unsure whether to keep focusing on the bride or start framing the judge, or maybe me. The groom's father asked a small question about the filing process, and Judge Ramsey answered him directly, her tone steady, but her eyes flicking briefly in my direction just once. Subtle. Intentional. Danielle's smile was tightening by the second. She could feel the attention slipping, but she didn't know how to pull it back. She wasn't used to being invisible. That was supposed to be my role. She had rehearsed for this moment. In her version of the story, I was a side note. But now the room was unsure. She could feel it. The ceremony closed. No applause, just polite nods, tight smiles, a few posed photos. When it was over, everyone stood and began to gather their things. The groom's uncle walked past me on his way to the exit. "Didn't realize you were that Mallory Carter," he said under his breath. "Impressive." I simply smiled. "It's not something I say out loud," I replied, and I meant it. That was the difference between my sister and me. She needed the room to know who she was. I only needed the room to remember it after I left. Danielle was lingering by the doors, clearly debating whether to approach me. She waved at the photographer to get more group shots, but the energy was off. Her fiancé's mother made a quiet excuse to step outside. One of the aunts checked her watch. Even the photographer started packing up before she was ready. She glanced toward me. "Mallory, could you get in one photo? Just one with the family?" I stood, not to take the picture, but to gather my purse. "No thank you," I said calmly. "I'm not part of this family portrait." The words weren't cruel, just clear. Danielle blinked, caught off guard by how measured it was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. But everyone heard it. Her fiancé's sister looked down at the floor. The court officer at the back cleared his throat and suddenly found his clipboard very interesting. Judge Ramsey passed near me on her way out. She didn't stop, but she spoke just loud enough for Danielle to hear. "Take care, Miss Carter. The committee still talks about your 2022 brief." And then she was gone. That was the moment. Danielle stood frozen bouquet at her side, fingers curled tightly around the stems. The air in the hallway had changed again, but this time there was no performance to mask it. She had painted me as unfinished, undefined, and beneath her. But now, the very people she was trying to impress were treating me like someone who shaped rooms they just walked into. A few more guests trickled out. Small talk died, and then it was quiet. She turned toward me one last time. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, low and a little breathless. Her voice didn't carry this time. No one else heard it but me. I gave her the same look I'd held all morning, gentle, reserved, distant. "Because you never asked." She didn't respond, and I didn't wait. I walked out of the courthouse the same way I had walked in. Alone. Unbothered. Understated. But this time, everyone had seen me. Outside the courthouse, the light had changed. That hazy midday glow that turns white marble into something warmer. I stood near the curb beside a city planter filled with low shrubs, unsure if I wanted to head straight home or walk a few blocks just to clear my mind. The ceremony had ended technically, but the weight of it hadn't lifted. I watched the rest of the wedding party spill out in waves, heels clicking, jackets draped over arms, voices lowered just enough to signal restraint. No one was laughing anymore. The congratulations had become formal, polite, short. Danielle exited last, flanked by her now husband and the photographer, who was still trying to convince her to take more couple shots outside. Her dress looked slightly wrinkled at the waist. She must have sat too long between the ceremony and the signatures. She smiled tightly and adjusted the hem, pretending not to notice that the group photos had already wrapped without her input. A woman from her fiancé's side approached me near the crosswalk. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed. She lowered her sunglasses as she neared. "I didn't realize you were that Mallory Carter," she said with a curious smile. "No wonder Judge Ramsey looked so comfortable." I nodded, offering no further explanation. She hesitated, as though hoping I'd elaborate, then added, "My brother-in-law mentioned your work on judicial ethics. Impressive. You must keep a very low profile." "Intentionally," I replied. "That's how things get done." She smiled at that, then looked over her shoulder toward Danielle, whose eyes flicked toward us briefly, then away. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. Inside the building, the judge hadn't left yet. Her assistant was finishing up the official filings, double-checking the ledger. A few courthouse staff members lingered in the hallway, talking quietly about the ceremony. I could hear my name mentioned more than once. Not loudly, but with that soft deference that follows people who hold influence they never advertise. One of the junior clerks passed by me again and said almost reverently, "We covered your 2020 advisory draft in my law and ethics class. I had no idea that was you." His voice held no malice, just quiet awe, and maybe a little confusion because I didn't look like what he expected. I didn't carry a briefcase. I wasn't wearing anything particularly expensive. I wasn't on in the way people usually are when they expect an audience. That's the part Danielle never understood. Some power doesn't walk in wearing heels and headlines. It arrives quietly, unannounced, but unmistakable. Across the hall, I saw Judge Ramsey preparing to leave. Her assistant handed her a folder. As she turned toward the main doors, Danielle stepped forward, finally gathering the nerve to approach her. "Judge Ramsey," she began. I wanted to thank you again. It was really special having someone of your experience today." The judge paused, patient, but unreadable. "Of course. I wasn't expecting someone at your level to officiate," Danielle added with a small laugh. "Mallory didn't mention you two had history." That word landed wrong. History. The judge's gaze didn't soften. "I wouldn't call it history," she said simply. "I'd call it a professional relationship built on integrity." Danielle's smile thinned. "Oh. Right. Well, I hope the ceremony wasn't too dull for you." "It wasn't dull," the judge said. "It was revealing." Danielle looked confused, maybe even defensive. "I'm sorry, but Judge Ramsey didn't explain." She shifted her weight slightly, and then without fanfare turned to me. She didn't just nod this time. She stepped closer, and then she extended her hand. "Miss Carter," she said warmly, "I hope we'll cross paths again soon. The committee values your insight." I took her hand and shook it gently. "Thank you, Your Honor." That's when it happened. It wasn't a bow, not exactly, but she dipped her head. Not lower than mine, just slightly forward. A gesture that, in this setting, from someone like her, meant everything. Danielle saw it. So did her new in-laws. So did the clerk behind the counter who stopped flipping papers mid-motion. Respect. Not out of obligation. Not for show. Real, earned, visible respect. Danielle opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see the storm brewing behind her perfectly composed expression. She had walked into this building expecting to be the center of attention. She left realizing she'd been a supporting character in someone else's moment, and that someone hadn't asked for it. Judge Ramsey gave me one last nod, then turned and exited with the quiet dignity that seemed to follow her everywhere. Danielle stood frozen. Her new husband was already talking to a cousin about the dinner reservation. No one was watching her anymore. She looked at me, and for once she didn't say anything clever. She just stood there, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't. There was nothing left to say. Danielle had always been the loudest person in every room. But when Judge Ramsey thanked me warmly publicly, and by name, something inside her went silent. It wasn't shame. Not yet. It was recognition. The quiet kind that lands like static and doesn't leave. She followed me outside the courthouse like she wasn't ready to let the moment close. Her heels clicked faster than usual, but she didn't call my name until we were nearly across the street. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, breath-catching on the question. I didn't answer immediately. I let the question sit between us like an unpaid bill. Then I turned just enough to meet her eyes. "Because you weren't asking to understand. You were asking to rank me." The wind picked up as I said it, low, cool, indifferent. It passed through us like judgment without volume. Danielle stood there in her silk dress bouquet, wilting slightly in one hand, trying to recover her footing. "I didn't mean to make you feel small," she said. That line. It's the kind of apology people give themselves, not the person they hurt. It wasn't about me. It was about the discomfort settling into her chest now that the narrative had flipped. "You didn't make me feel anything," I replied. "You just showed me who you were willing to be." Her mouth opened, but no response came. The words she had always relied on, wit, charm, social gloss, they failed her now. She looked toward the restaurant where her new in-laws were already gathering. Her husband stood at the door scanning the street. But his eyes didn't land on her. Not yet. I turned away first. Not out of disrespect, not out of triumph. Just done. Because the most complete kind of revenge isn't confrontation. It's contrast. She had needed the room to love her. I didn't need the room at all. And yet the room had turned quietly, unmistakably toward me. It wasn't just the judge. It was the clerk who stopped flipping papers mid-motion. The photographer who shifted his lens. The court officer who whispered my name like it carried weight. The in-laws who started asking questions not about Danielle's dress or ceremony, but about me. Danielle had worked so hard to curate a day that felt elevated, but the moment she tried to step on my silence, her own performance unraveled. And I had never raised my voice. I walked 2 blocks to where I had parked my car, slipped off my shoes before I even started the engine. Let the silence of my cabin wrap around me like relief. No bouquet, no veil, no spotlight. No, just stillness. That night, I didn't scroll through wedding photos. I didn't wonder how she'd crop me out of the group shots. I didn't wonder what she'd tell people later, because it no longer mattered. Instead, I opened my laptop, reviewed notes for Tuesday's Ethics Advisory Board call, and confirmed a coffee meeting with a federal judge I had been quietly mentoring for months. I poured a glass of white wine. Checked my inbox. The world I had built, quiet, deliberate, earned, was still exactly where I left it. And that was the difference. Danielle wanted visibility. I had credibility. She wanted recognition. I had legacy. I thought about what Judge Ramsey had said before she left. Some people have spent years shaping the foundation others walk into. That's who I was. Not her foil. Not her ghost. Not her unfinished comparison. Just myself. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a text. From a number I didn't recognize at first. Just a single message: "You carry rooms quietly? Thank you for reminding me what that looks like." ER. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed the praise, but because of what it confirmed. That day hadn't been about revenge. It had been about return. Not return to Danielle's world, but return to my own worth. My own shape. My own name. And that's the kind of ending you don't need to perform. You just live it. Danielle's wedding day would be wrapped in polite stories, filtered pictures, and rehearsed memories. But some guests, especially the ones who mattered, would remember something else. They would remember the sister no one expected to matter. The one who didn't speak up, because she didn't have to. What stayed with me long after reading wasn't Mallory's composure. It was the precision of her presence. She didn't need to win a battle. She simply walked in with truth already intact. That's the kind of revenge that transcends cruelty. It doesn't cut, it corrects. Quietly, completely, and with dignity that outlasts every spotlight. If you've ever been treated like a background character in your own story, if your silence was mistaken for weakness but ended up saying everything, Revenge with Seren was made for you. Subscribe for more true voiceover-ready stories where stillness becomes a strategy and silent revenge rewrites the script.